Hey guys, I'm Ava, and let's talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! Today we are going to be looking at another budget deck. This time it is a deck list that I made. It is a $75 virtual world deck list. I was able to get this so cheap just by cutting out a few cards from the extra deck and also using cheaper staples and hand traps. So the main card that I cut from the extra deck is going to be Zeus, which is very commonly ran in this. If you have it, that's really great to add. I bet a lot of people do. And if you don't have it, that's great. You don't have to spend the $15 to get it. I think this deck is still pretty good and pretty consistent without it, and you can still get a really strong board. And then in terms of hand traps, I chose to go for Cyframe Gear Gamma and Effect Veiler. These two are fairly cheap and work well within this deck. If you don't have them though, feel free to substitute something that you do have, or if you think you have something better, like if you have Triple Tactics talent, feel free to add that. So let's go over our main deck and just talk about how this deck works. First up is my waifu. She's going to be our kind of ace monster for this deck, and she's going to be our searcher. So we are always going to want to get her out on turn 1. And the thing that's unique to her in this deck is that she can also search for spells and traps, which is going to be useful if we are trying to summon something like Zolkin and go for our Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon combo. So if we don't have a spell or trap, we can use Lulu to search for one, and then we can execute our Zolkin combo very easily. Next up is Lao Lao. So most of our main deck virtual world monsters share the first half of their effect, which is you can target one virtual world card on the field and send another one of a different type from the deck to the graveyard. So if you're targeting a spell, you could send a monster or trap. If you're targeting a trap, you could send a monster or spell. And if you're targeting a monster, you could send a spell or trap. And this is useful because our spells and traps all have effects in the graveyard that often are a bit better than the effects they have on the field, or just easier to use. So Lao Lao is going to be great because it will let us get one of those monsters out of the graveyard if we've sent one, with its secondary effect, which is to special summon a virtual world monster from your graveyard after successfully summoning it. So it's pretty easy to get out a synchro monster just starting with Lao Lao. Also, just a note, most cards in this deck kind of follow a pattern, so you'll note they're all level 3s or 6s, which is really good for getting out level 9 or level 6 synchro cards, and also Xyz cards. You can see we are not running any Link monsters. That's because a lot of virtual world cards have the effect that you can only summon Link 3 or higher, which kind of eliminates them, but also they're not necessary for this deck to work really well. Another thing they have in common is that our tuners are both going to be wind psychic types. So Lao Lao and Maihime Lulu are going to be our main tuners, and they are both wind psychic types. We have our non-tuners that are earth worm types, so that's going to be Gigi and Lily, and also their names kind of share a pattern, so it makes it easy to remember. We also are running 3 copies of Nyang Nyang, which is not a tuner, but its effect from the graveyard lets you special summon it as a tuner, so you could consider it to be a tuner in certain situations, especially because that's how you're most often going to play it. We also are going to be running 1 copy of Toto, and this card will also let you summon it as a tuner. It's also kind of good for unbricking your hand. This card is really up to personal preference. Some people don't run it. You could skip it and just run a 3rd Effect Veiler or something else. But I've found that when I'm playing, this card has unbricked my hand a few times. For example, if you draw into Toto, Lao Lao, and Lily, and you just have something like Effect Veiler and Forbidden Chalice in your hand, Lao Lao is going to be really good to unbrick that hand, because you wouldn't be able to summon Lao Lao or Lily onto the field because you don't have a virtual world card to target, but Toto's effect lets you normal summon it without having to have anything on the field, or if you have exclusively worm and psychic type cards on the field, which is obviously very easy because the cards in this deck are all themed that way. So I think Toto's a very solid addition, and it just gives you an extra level 6, and these cards all synergize together super well. It gives you another card to target, and it's just a great card all around in my opinion. But I'm only running 1 because I think you really only need 1. Next up, we are running Lily. Lily is kind of like double Foolish Burial, so of course you get to send 1 to the graveyard, but then its secondary effect also lets you send 1 more to the graveyard, so you could send something like Nyang Nyang, which is our next card, and it is going to allow you to special summon it from the graveyard if you special summon a level 3. So if you special summon your Lulu by her effect or by a spell or trap, you can get out your Nyang Nyang, and it will then act as a tuner, so it's just a pretty solid card to have. It gives you an extra way to play in the graveyard, and it's a good target to send to the graveyard because it has an effect that can be activated there. Next up, as I said, we have Cyframe Gear Gamma and Cyframe Driver. These are of course just going to be our hand traps. We are also running 2 Effect Veilers. I decided to run 2 effect failures. 1, so the deck is 40 cards, and 2, you can see that between Cyframe Gamma and Effect Failure, we are running 6 hand trap monsters. Cyframe Gear Gamma is technically running at 4 because we have Driver as well, but if you want to substitute both of these out, you could substitute out for 2 sets of 3. So I thought this was going to be a bit better and more optimal, and I think you don't really need more effect failures than this in the deck. Next up, we are running Pot of Desires. This is just a good option that is budget and lets you draw more. Obviously, there are other cards that have similar effects, but most of them are very expensive. Pot of Desires also synergizes well with this deck, which is why I added it. Several cards in this deck have effects that will let you retrieve cards that have been banished, including face down ones such as Nyang Nyang, which can do that. And then you also have Shen Shen, because Shen Shen lets you return a banished card to the graveyard. So it kind of synergizes well, and I think it's just a good card to have. Next up, we have Forbidden Chalice. So we're running Forbidden Chalice for a few reasons. First of all, it's just a good card all around. Second of all, there are a lot of situations when you're running this deck in particular that Forbidden Chalice would be useful. So one example of this would be Caliga. If you're running Caliga, it's a big floodgate. Basically, you can only activate 1 monster effect per turn. You also pair that with Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon and negate that 1 monster's effect on your opponent's turn, which kind of screws them over, unless maybe they're running something like Eldritch where they aren't actually playing that many monsters, but this deck can still do really well against Eldritch in my opinion. So you can use it against Caliga on your own turn, which is really solid, and of course you can use it against an opponent on their turn if you have Caliga on the field, but you don't have something like Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. So I think it is a pretty solid card and just pretty solid overall. And there might be a few situations where you want that extra 400 attack, of course, as well. And you know how to use Forbidden Chalice, I'm sure. Next up, we have Emergency Teleport. This is going to help unbreak our hand if we draw into something like Lao Lao and Lili. We can use this to get our first Virtual World card on the field and just get our combo rolling. If you need 1 extra card to complete your synchros, it's good for that as well. Also, there may be a situation where you want to get your Cyframe Gear Gamma on the field if you are trying to special summon Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon manually, although I don't really recommend that approach. It is much easier with Zolkin, but this is kind of a worst case scenario if, say, Zolkin got negated. Then we have our first Virtual World spell. So this one is Virtual World City Kowloon. Technically this card has like 4 possible effects, but most of the time only the first one is going to be very relevant. You are able to place directly onto the field face up a Virtual World spell or trap. So you could go for Chuche, which I think is a very solid one to have face up on the field, and the most ideal target because it is a trap, so you'd have to wait for something to trigger it. Qinglong, it's kind of a waste, and Qinglong's on-field effect isn't that good. Xuanwu, we basically only have to have in the graveyard. So most of the time you're going to be using Kowloon to put Chuche onto the field, and this is going to be really solid so you can get a spell or trap Virtual World target onto the field, which makes it much easier to send monsters to the grave or add them to the hand with Lulu or our other cards. Now, Kowloon also will let you do other effects depending on how many Virtual World Gate cards you have on the field, but you don't really want to have that many on the field at a time anyway. It's kind of a waste because they have such good graveyard effects. So I don't think this is going to come up too often, but maybe it will. Then we have Qinglong. Qinglong is really good in the graveyard. This is what we're going to want to send to the graveyard once we get our first Virtual World cards out, because you can add a Virtual World card from your graveyard to your hand, and then you also discard a card. So an ideal example of this would be if you did not draw into Lulu your first turn, you could search for Lulu using Qinglong, add her to the hand, then you can use her effect to search for whatever you need. And it has the added bonus that you can discard a card to the graveyard, which oftentimes is a plus in this deck because you could send something like Nyang Nyang, which has its effect that only works in the graveyard, so that's just good fodder for Qinglong. Then we have Called by the Grave. Obviously, you know why this card's in here. It's just a solid card. Then we have Chuche, which in my opinion is our strongest trap card. You can target 1 face-up card on the field, and you can shuffle 2 of your banished Virtual World cards into your deck. So this can also pair well with things like Pot of Desires or other cards that let us banish things, such as Nyang Nyang and Toto, which both have effects that will banish them. It also works well with our Qinglong and our Xuanwu's effects that banish them, or Chuche itself. So you can return those cards, you get to recycle them, and you can destroy a face-up card on the field, which I think is pretty solid. It also has a very good graveyard effect because you can increase or decrease the level or rank of a monster you control by 3 for that turn. So this is going to be really good if you're trying to get out your 6s or your 9s, but you don't have the right combo of levels. you can get Chuche into the graveyard first turn, and you will always have the right amount because you can just match them however you please. Then we have Xuanwu. This one has a very solid graveyard effect. Its on-field effect is okay and comes up certain times. Basically, you can target one monster in the field and change its battle position, but its graveyard effect is very solid because you can special summon a virtual card from the graveyard. So that's why we are running one copy of Xuanwu. In terms of our extra deck, our main board is going to be Caliga, Shen Shen, and Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. So the way we're going to do this is we would want to get out Zolkin first, then we can get ourselves a Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. We also then need Muddy Mud Dragon, which will help us get to our invoked Caliga, because Muddy Mud Dragon, of course, is what's going to replace our Alistair the Invoker, and we can use Zolkin as our dark card, so that's a good way to recycle it. You could potentially also run another level 7 or 8 Synchro monster, but I think that this is a pretty solid option because Caliga is our great floodgate. So this is going to be really good in this deck because we're running Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, which is going to negate the effect of a monster, and when they can only activate one to begin with, it's pretty solid. We are also running Shen Shen, which is the kind of the boss monster for Virtual World. All cards that are sent from the field to the graveyard are banished instead, so it's kind of like a mini macrocosmos. And again, this just synergizes well with our other cards that have effects relating to cards being banished, wanting to recycle them, such as with Chuche. And when you attack, you can also return one banished monster to the graveyard. So you could do that with something like Nyang Yang, and you can use her effect all over again. So Shen Shen is a very solid card. You can also resummon it from your graveyard by banishing 2 monsters with different types and attributes. So that would be one of our wind monsters and one of our earth monsters. So it's just kind of hard to get rid of and pretty annoying. Then we have Vermilion Dragon Mech, which is going to help us banish a card, and it will also destroy one on the field. So very solid, and it doesn't have to be face up. So that is one bonus. If you're playing against a deck that runs a lot of traps like Eldritch, Vermilion Dragon Mech might be a solid card to play there. We're also running Cracker Dragon. It's not going to come up all the time, but it can be useful sometimes, and it is one of our level 9s, so it's just super easy to get out. And if it happens to be a fairly long duel and you've ran through a few cards, Cracker Dragon could be pretty useful. You could also substitute this out for another 7 or 8 to use with Zolkin, but I think that this works fine. Next we have our Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. I think you guys probably already know what this does, but basically you can negate a card's effect, you can destroy that monster, and you can gain the attack of it for 1 turn, so that's pretty solid. And if you are battling an opponent's level 5 or higher monster, you can add its attack to this card's during damage calculation. Next up we have another Virtual World card. This time it is yugioh. This card is pretty solid. It's hard to get rid of if you have the right cards in the graveyard, which are just Virtual World cards. So if you have 2 monsters of the same original type and attribute in your graveyard, it cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects. Of course, your opponent may be able to get around this, but overall very solid. And its second effect is also great too. You can banish those 2 monsters from your graveyard and target 1 card on the field and send it to the graveyard, which is great because you can use it on things that can't be destroyed by card effects. So if you're playing against something like Invoked Shaddoll Dogmatica and they have Winda out, this is kind of going to be one of your outs for that. So I think that's pretty solid. Then we have Coral Dragon and Stardust Charge Warrior. These are both going to let us get an extra card. Stardust Charge Warrior is when we summon it, and Coral Dragon is when it goes to the graveyard. And Coral Dragon is a tuner, and it also will let you discard 1 card and target 1 card your opponent controls and destroy it. So this is good. It also works on face down cards, which is great, and we can get another card in the graveyard if you'd like. So we have these because they're kind of free draws, and we would combine them together to make ourselves Zolkin, because Coral Dragon is a tuner and Stardust Charge Warrior is a non-tuner, and they're both level 6s. It works super well for that, and a great way to go into Zolkin if you have the resources, because you get 2 additional draws, which is going to be useful. We have Muddy Mud Dragon up next. We already talked about this card. Basically, it is what is going to help us get Caliga out on the field by acting as Alistair. Then we are running a few Xyz monsters. These are going to be number 39 Utopia, Constellar Ptolemy M7, Virtual World Phoenix Fanfan, Phantom Knights of Big Sword, and Bamboozling Gossip Shadow. So these cards are often in a lot of decks. The one that is really specific to this is Fanfan. Basically, by detaching 2 Xyz materials from it, you can banish 1 card from your opponent's side of the field and in either player's graveyard. So this is going to be good if they have a card that has a lot of effects from the field, like something like Eldritch. you could send him to be banished. Next up, we are running Ptolemy M7, which is going to be good. Maybe if we're going first, just to give us a bit more protection. You can return a card to the hand from the field or graveyard, which is a very solid effect. So overall, I think this deck is pretty strong. It is fairly consistent as well. I'm going to show you a test game just to show you what a combo could look like, because it does take a few steps. And the one thing with this deck is that you need to be mindful of the order in which you do things and mindful of the card you are targeting, because you can only send cards to the graveyard that are not of that type. So if you are targeting a monster, you can only send spells and traps, and vice versa for spells and traps. So if you're targeting a monster, you can only send a spell or trap. So you just want to be mindful of that and make sure you're doing everything in the right order. Before we go into our duel, by the way, why don't you subscribe to my channel if you like this content? It just lets me know. I'm trying to get to 500 by the end of the year, and I would really appreciate it. So now let's get into our duel for real. Okay, so we're going to be looking at a replay real quick. This is just against AI, just for the purposes of showing you the combo. So we drew into Qinglong, Chute, Lili, Gigi, and Lili again. So we are going to want to play a spell first. We are going to go in with our Qinglong. This is going to give us a better target. We are going to activate the effect of our Lili. So we activate the effect of Lili, we send Nyang Nyang to the graveyard so that we can get it onto the field later. Then we are also going to send Xuanwu to the graveyard because its graveyard effect is fairly strong. We are going to use Gigi just to get it on the field. It doesn't have an effect that will come into play till the end phase when it will let us get an extra monster. Then we have our Nyang Nyang on the field because we summoned our Gigi after, and Gigi is a level 3, so we can special Nyang Nyang from the graveyard, and it is now a tuner. So we are going to go in and get ourselves a Synchro. We are going for our Stardust Charge Warrior because he gives us a free draw, and we're going to be using him soon to go into Tzolk'in and Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. So we're going to be going through a few more combos with our Virtual World cards. We are going to activate Lulu, send Chuche to the graveyard because it will give us +or-3 on our cards so that we can make sure all of our combos go smoothly. We are also going to add Lao Lao to the hand because when we summon Lao Lao, we can get a card from the graveyard. But first, we activate the effect of Xuanwu to add Gigi to the field again, and then we are going to pitch Lili for this effect, and we are going to use Lao Lao to get another card on the field. So you can see we went for Coral Dragon. This is our tuner that is going to help us with Tzolk'in, and when it leaves the field, we will get an extra draw. So we send those, and we bring ourselves out a Tzolk'in. We kept Chuche in our hand because we can set it so that we can get ourselves a Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon by activating its effect. And right now, we are getting our extra card from Coral Dragon. We set Chuche, and we bring out Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. Next up, we are going to activate the effect of our Lao Lao, targeting a spell, so we pitch a monster. So with Lao Lao, we chose to summon Gigi from the graveyard. Can't use its effect, but we've already used it once this turn anyway, so it kind of makes an ideal target because you can only use its effect once per turn. We're using Chuche to decrease the level of our Lao Lao by 3, which will allow us to get out our level 6, which is Muddy Mud Dragon. And now we should be able to go into Caliga. So we will also be getting out Shen Shen this turn. We're just doing that first because we can. Then we are going to activate Muddy Mud Dragon's ability, and we will be able to fuse it with our Tzolk'in to get ourselves a Caliga. So this board is really strong because it is very difficult for our opponent to get through it. They can only activate one monster effect per turn, and if they rely on combos with their monsters, their deck is going to be kind of screwed. And since we're playing against Dogmatica, that will hinder them a good bit. So you can see that we will just end our turn like this, and we add Lao Lao to our hand in the end phase. This is by Gigi's effect, and we will be able to use Lao Lao next turn to combo into 2 more monsters by summoning a level 3, and then we will be able to use Nyang Nyang's effect again to get it onto the field, and we will have 3 cards to use for Synchros or Xyzs or whatever we would like. Our opponent is going to be going for Alistair. They are not going to be able to do it though. So they put him onto the field. We are going to negate his effect with Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, which will also destroy him. And they've already used up their 1 monster. They decide that they want to get our Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. We are going to go ahead and allow this to go through because they will not be able to stop our combo next turn anyway. They go through and they ice Shen Shen, but next turn we are going to be able to summon enough monsters to go for the OTK, and we will just do that very quickly. So we are going to draw. We draw into Forbidden Chalice, which is very good here because we can use that to negate Caliga, which we are going to do. we're going to get ourselves a Shen back onto the field by its ability. Like I said, it didn't really matter that they got rid of it. We took 1200 damage, but we bring it back this turn. We've used Forbidden Chalice, which will now negate Caligo, so we can activate multiple monster effects this turn, and we will be able to attack with it as well, and we are just going to summon one more monster that is going to get us our OTK. In this case, we are going for Vermilion Dragon Mech because this will allow us to destroy a card on the field, and we can just pop one of their back rows so that they are less likely to be able to counter our attack. So you can see that this is in fact game. Overall, I think this deck is quite solid. You can see that we were able to win on our second turn. Obviously we're playing against AI, but I think this showed kind of the combo potential of this deck and just how quickly you can end your opponent. So I think this is very solid. Let me know what you guys think of this deck. Obviously it's only $75, so for what it costs, it's very solid, I think. As you guys can see, I think this deck is pretty solid for being $75. You could maybe even get it a bit cheaper by cutting out your Cyframe Gear Gamma, which is $4, but like, how cheap are your hand traps going to be? To save like $5, I think you might as well just keep them in because I think they're pretty good in this deck. But overall, it is very solid for the cost, and I'm pretty pleased with this deck list. I've played against my friends with it, and they were not using budget decks, and this deck performed just fine. So let me know what you guys think. Do you think there's anything I could add to improve this deck? Is it worth spending a bit more to get better staple cards, or do you think I could actually get this cheaper? And if so, what do you think I should cut? If you guys like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I really want to get to 500 subs by the end of the year, and I think I might be able to. But if you like this, please give the video a like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.